Chapter 11. Casor's Luck Turns. We know this about John Casor. His papa taught him life is a roller coaster and to enjoy every up and every down. In Ndongo, that is in reference to the hunt. The daily activity of finding and delivering food to the community, to the hut. Even if life becomes hard, Papa showed the smile that he enjoyed, the top of the tree, and the laughing smile as you pick yourself up from slipping down a hill. John Casor carried that ability to hold on with him. His luck, however, changed a few times during his life. First in losing music, then his father and himself to slavers. The blessing of America was good luck for John Casor. The timing of landing and the very survival of the colony depended on all races being colorblind. This is 1648. Some 128 years before independence from England and her laws. The ride of his life began on that ship from Point Noir and Ndongo in the background to America. In Jamestown, from 1610 to 1650, you were more likely to live if you were not white. The blacks and others were simply stronger humans. It was fine for the first many years until Anthony Johnson and his black farming families learned and applied the law. Tony was known to be heard saying, "I have my mark and this is my land." John Casor heard this on his first day in America and many times thereafter. Until John Casor said it to Tony when John recognized his own mark. As the uppity black men really grew the Johnson farm, the rules for John Casor to marry Amy Johnson was for him to be a free American. Indentured servitude had rules too. The roller coaster peaked for John Casor at Corn Tree Branch, a planted spot between the Johnson farm and Jamestown. This location was John and Amy's favorite, and they spent many an afternoon talking and nurturing these plans. The view from Corn Tree Branch was of the ravine to the river below, and between the trees there you could see the Johnsons' rows and rows of corn. The tree roots formed a natural bench, and the flowers spread in a ring that reminds Casor of his first night of capture. A night that feels 1,000,000 miles away, but was only just a few years ago. Amy professed her love, and Casor was high as a kite. Tony, not so much. He pushed back on the contract for 7 years. But his wife, family, and Amy in particular convinced John to set Casor free. Tony held his breath. He knew this was not good. Not good at all. Tony did not have a choice, so in year 5 of 7, he set John Casor free. John Casor enjoys a few days of freedom, and then the plight of all men set in, having to work to eat and live. Colonel Robert Parker had a farm right next door and offered Casor an indentured servitude job, which Casor took and learned the hard way about his choice of freedom. At the Parker farm, life was wholly different, and seeing Amy Johnson was not part of it. In the drive for freedom to marry Amy Johnson, Casor set foot in the divinity of descendants falling into hell to save the heathen. Tony Johnson always knew Parker was a nutter, but in business Parker played and paid fair. He was, so to speak, an honest man. Casor even smiled at the Parker Ranch. The Times with George and Robert Parker was a Bible-thumping mess that drilled a doctrine of gold. Casor came to learn that the Parkers thought him a slave, and they started to treat him as such. Casor still smiled, knowing hope above hope that Ndongo would not have brought Amy into his life and leave him with only one kiss. A kiss at corn tree branch that carries John forward. Still, Parker was a businessman, and he did a bunch of business with Anthony Johnson. So with that in mind, Johnson visited Parker to ask him to return Casor. Parker said no. Possession was 9/10 of the law, so no way. Amy kept on pestering her dad, but she was a planner and offered a path to sue Parker for ownership of Casor. Since Casor was let early from his service, Amy argued that Tony could claim and sue. Amy got message to John Casor that Tony will fight to gain him back. And after they can marry, luck changes again. The Virginia courtroom is still there in Jamestown. You can visit it today and touch the lectern where testimony was offered. The year of 1654 heard Colonel Robert Parker say that Casor was a free man by the hands of Anthony. He continued with his new contract and expressed his rights more as a slave owner than indentured servant contract. Samuel Goldsmith also testified that Casor was an indentured servant of Johnson's. Amy argued in court papers, and Tony Johnson spoke at the lectern. He told the story of walking John Casor by holding his hand on the plank before he landed on Virginia's shores. The court returned John Casor as a slave for life to Anthony Johnson. John Casor was not a criminal and is the first non-criminal named a slave for life. Casor and Johnson celebrated the victory quickly. Tony and John were back as a team. John married Amy, and the celebration was beyond epic and beyond any scale, but it was a black celebration, as the white courtroom ran amok after this 1655 order against John Casor. The Virginia courthouse turned into a tyrannical rule, making body that simply outlawed the black man by century's end. John Casor's luck had changed. He lived out his life with Amy as virtually free under Tony, but the access to mixed-race life and white society was erased. The Johnson farm burned down in the 1600s, And with Amy's help, again, they petitioned to the Virginia court to be exempt from paying taxes. Tony won this important victory that allowed this farm to recover and march full steam ahead. But luck changed again for John Casor, now the father figure of the clan after Tony Johnson died in 1670. The Virginia courthouse stripped the Johnson heirs of their rights to property because they were black. The Johnson sons and Casor were able to lease a smaller farm and continued to survive. They moved from Virginia and its hateful laws to Maryland, where their American dream died on its genealogy path. John Casor was a lucky man. Simultaneously, he was the first legal slave in America, and he was the last free American. Chapter 12. The Virginia Courthouse. Word for word. Aghast, this writer thinks. The thumping on the Bible to apologize for slavery is astonishing. Its birth is in the Virginia law of 1661, establishing the belly as ownership. Please refer to this website. In 1550, the dunce cap becomes a symbol of being an idiot. In 1610, John Rolfe introduced a strain of tobacco which quickly became the colony's economic engine. In 1619, indentured servants imported. In 1619, Anthony Johnson and 19 others came to Jamestown. In 1619, a Dutch ship, the White Lion, captured 20 enslaved Africans in battle with a Spanish ship. They landed at Jamestown, Virginia, for repairs from battle. For food and supplies, the Dutch traded the enslaved Africans to the colonists as indentured servants. 1624, dunce, as a word in context of idiot, appeared in text. Look, racism is in the White House as I write this story. The knowledge learned is the use of hate to allow crowd justification of racism and in Virginia slavery. Please see this website. In 1648, John Casor arrived in Virginia as indentured servant to Anthony Johnson. In 1650, about 350 Negroes live in Virginia out of 30,000. In 1650, Negroes are not allowed to own arms. In 1655, John Casor named legal slave for life to owner Anthony Johnson. In 1655, composer Johann Rosenmuller is imprisoned as the result of a scandal concerning alleged homosexual activities. 1662, mom's status determined child's fate. 1670, whites could not be owned by blacks or Indians. 1670, slave trade a real business. 1699, Virginia made it illegal to grant freedom to a slave. It made it illegal to marry between races. By 1699, every black or mixed-race person was legally ordered out of Virginia. All blacks were stripped of their property rights, even their rights to own black slaves. April 26, 1637, account submitted by Joseph Clifton, executor of Daniel Hopkinson, merchant of the Trisom, and Jane of London. Mr. Joseph Blow, for servants carried on her late voyage to Virginia, Cornwallis, on this ship. But not the one of the Revolutionary War. Seems he was an attorney. Wrigglesworth, Peter, turned over to Robert Glasscock. Wrigglesworth was one of the many to be handed over to owners or masters from almost every ship that arrived in America. Wrigglesworth! Fun to say, but his fate is not being discussed today. Virginia should be renamed. Its citizens should reject this name and its history. The Virginia Company of London needs to be put in the dustbin of hell. Why? The use of the pen and privilege to cast non-whites as heathens needing to be saved, casting non-whites as the devil and perfect as slave. Virginia, recall your name. 1840, Dickens' use of dunce. Between Dickens' first use of dunce and the next is dumb kids sitting in the corner for being racist. The Quakers started it, the push for abolition of slavery. December 24th, 1865, KKK is founded. Moms did not like the dunce cap and made a cover for it. It did not change the fact that what was underneath was indeed a stupid racist. It's just let the racist pretend to hide. This history of hate in America is the Virginia law naming the belly contents slaves. This created a direct threat to every child. Every white mom was trained, ingrained, instinctually driven to be a white supremacist. White supremacy was about protecting kids from becoming slaves. The profit from slavery was just too large for America to care to stop it. In law, non-whites lost everything. Chapter 13. Be careful what you wish for. By exposing Colonel Robert Parker to the court proceedings on human ownership, it awoke instructions ingrained in his family history. Profit for his church was allowed at any means. Remember, the first slave ship returned to the Queen of England, and she was aghast, yelling and promising jail to the slaver. But then she got paid off. My mind says, have some beads, bitch. Get ready for more wealth. Parker's grandfather learned in Holland the propaganda side of the slave trade. He was regularly used by management to give sermons of white power and saving heathens. The Parker Slave Manual was triggered by Anthony Johnson being declared owner for life of John Casor. The next siege were to secure a future slave workforce. Behind the scene, George and Robert Parker wrote Mom's Law. The Virginia Company of London was long gone by 1655, but its actual rocket fuel of human exploitation was rampant. The Parker Slave Manual showed how to achieve the principle of partus sequitur ventrum into law. The Virginia law ruled that the children of enslaved mothers would be born into slavery, regardless of their father's race or status. Really, folks, this church doctrine of partus sequitur ventrum is as evil as it gets. It is the legal foundation for white supremacy in America. Further, this law made white moms the defenders of this hate. Chapter 14. Casor and Amy love and rejoice. No matter to two lovebirds, John and Amy were now forever inseparable. From the courtroom, John went straight to the Johnson farm. He did not acknowledge or say goodbye to George and Robert Parker. He was pissed. The doors of the Virginia courthouse swung open, and the air was fresh, and the sky powder-puff blue, and even puffier clouds. Usually, it is once a week or so in the past, John and Amy went to one of their planted gardens. But today, they stopped and kissed at each one. During John's time in Parker Hell, the gardens were the only way to communicate between Amy and John. They were not allowed to see each other during the Parker tenure. The flowers noticed them. Each of the 7 love nest gardens woke for John and Amy. The bees said hello, and the birds sang loud. While John was gone, Amy and Tony built a cabin and the Johnson farm for his return. The space was spectacular and showed Tony's love for Amy. Tony left court happy too. He did take the time to shake Parker Brothers' hand. As opposed to John, Tony was always working an angle. This victory from the court told Parker to pay, so Tony knew his leverage. Nevertheless, Tony left proud and headed to the farm. He cleaned up John's new home and set a fire in the fireplace to signal Amy it was ready for them. Before John left the courthouse steps, Tony said to him, "You are free, but to all others you belong to me." John beamed and shook Tony's hand. Freedom and being free overtook John, and as he was walking, he explained to Amy he is now in Ndongo. He is home, and Mother Earth of Virginia has transformed to greet him. John grabbed the first sticks he saw and started a beat. Amy knew not of what to do. John's beat was fast and clean. He added stomps from his big feet, and then a grunt, spin, and a smile. He tossed the sticks to Amy and picked up 2 more. Amy was exhilarated as she was enveloped in John's freedom. She screamed and stomped, and John replied. The echo was the song and the beat of freedom. The beats of love as the two came close. The feet kept stomping, both now a circle around each other. The birds above played along and sung powerful tweets. John and Amy dropped their sticks and kissed. The passion was deep, and all time and sound stopped for both. The slowness of the withdrawal and the wry smiles told of their future. Amy saw the smoke signal and grabbed John's hand for a gleeful run home. The family, friends, and Papa and Mama were all there to greet John and Amy. The cheers and love were huge, and John was floating. Then Amy grabbed his hand, and she pulled him in the direction of the new cabin. The others came behind, but with enough time for the two to have a moment. John's eyes welled up. He fell to his knees and kissed the ground when Amy said, "Welcome home. This is ours." The crowd joined and the barbecue pits were lit. Wine flowed and freedom reigned on this family. Not once interrupted until 1670, when Anthony Johnson died at the amazing age of 70 years old. John and Amy Casor are lost to history from this point. John, Amy, Mary, and the Johnson's son were in Maryland by this time. Virginia outlawed blacks, so they moved. No matter to John and Amy Casor, they continued to tend and make more love gardens. John's hands could grow anything, and that contribution kept him safe and kept him smiling. Chapter 15. 1 to 10 is as 1 to 30,000 in Virginia. The hard part to understand is how few blacks lived in Virginia for it to generate such hateful and racist laws. The Dutch slavers, preachers, and the rats at the Virginia Company of London knew how to cast shame on a few to control the masses. Stunning to read again and again how the law supported slavery at the expense of morality. Further, that morality was twisted by the church to actually make non-whites heathens. Clearly, everything we have learned about Anthony Johnson, John Casor, and other black founding Americans is that without them, America would not have made it. Being a white gentleman at the beginning was an open target for Indians to kill you. The non-whites were healthier than the whites and survived in greater numbers the harsh winters and killer bugs. The Virginia Company of London only had shareholders to please, but their mismanagement cost them their commission of Virginia in 1624. The success of hard-working non-whites also led to a jealous need to impede their success. Whites owned the sea, gosh darn it, and the crown was white. Remember, the Queen of England detested slavery for less than 5 minutes after getting shiny objects of value.